So as Tomiko said, I was born and raised here in Oregon, and I'm a licensed naturopathic physician, so we're licensed as primary care doctors here in the state of Oregon. I've been in practice over 10 years, about 16 years now, it's hard to believe, and I am a strong advocate for nutrient-dense, whole food, plant-based lifestyle medicine, that it can transform lives at all stages, at all ages. Now, when I'm not working, as Tomiko said, I've got my two Chihuahuas, Millie and Sandy. And so that's little Millie over there on the left, and Sandy there. So yeah, you can see the little smiles. Hopefully they have a happy little life too. I do like to give a little bit of my background because sometimes people are interested in, why do you do what you do? And, I grew up in, a very rural area out in eastern Oregon. And, I had a very, let's say, food-centric family. We loved to eat, and we loved to eat lots of it. And so, of course, there were lots of heart disease, lots of obesity, lots of diabetes, lots of complications, strokes, things like that in my family. My dad, he passed away at 58 from complications from diabetes. And so at a really young age, I knew that I had to do a lot to change some lifestyle factors and things that we all grow up with certain habits, and sometimes we have to learn to do better sometimes. So first I'd like to talk about our amazing brain. It is an organ that weighs 3 pounds, yet it contains 100 billion neurons, brain cells, that are constantly signaling to each other. What's amazing about, even though it's only 3 pounds, it can continue to adapt to our environment, our lifestyle, and challenges throughout our life to build cognitive reserve and capacity. If there's one thing that I'd want you to take away, is at all life stages, we have the ability to make new connections, and our brains are going to continue to develop and to support what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. But there are some sobering statistics that we do have to address in this talk. Unfortunately, 1 in 9 people over 65 have Alzheimer's. The lifetime risk for Alzheimer's, it's 1 in 5 for women and 1 in 10 for men. And unfortunately, it's projected that by 2050, the number of people over 65 and above with Alzheimer's dementia is projected to reach 12.7 million people. Now, a lot of people throw around, is it dementia, is it Alzheimer's? Just, for this talk, it's a little bit used interchangeably, but dementia is really an umbrella term for many different kinds of cognitive impairment. The majority is Alzheimer's. It's 50 to 75% of all cases of dementia is Alzheimer's. Though we have vascular dementia, which accounts for 20 to 30%, such as, the same kinds of things that affect our heart, and strokes, affect our brain. We also have Lewy body dementia, which is a smaller amount, and then even a lesser amount is frontotemporal dementia. And sometimes people are affected by more than one kind of these dementias. Key facts about Alzheimer's is that it's a progressive disease of the brain that develops over decades. And this is going to impair memory, thinking, mood, and problem solving. It's sometimes thought that, it just happens when this just happens with old age. But it really takes decades for this, this horrible illness to really start showing its signs. So associated pathology include amyloid plaques and tau tangles in the brain. These unfortunately cause a loss of connections between the neurons, and eventually it causes atrophy or shrinking in the brain. Now, we have the main biological processes that drive this cognitive decline are inflammation, oxidation, glucose, and lipid dysregulation. But the good news is many of those things can be affected by lifestyle changes. Now, how many of us think that, if our parents had it, if our grandparents had it, that's just the way it is? Well, the nice part is science is showing that genetics is not destiny, and in fact, we have a lot of control over how our genes are going to express. And adherence to healthy lifestyles can offset genetic risk. Now, there are purely genetic caused Alzheimer's out there. It only accounts for 3% of all cases. And these are usually early onset Alzheimer's that can affect people between 30 to 60 years old. But even with lifestyle changes, the illness can be pushed out further. There are other genes that are expressed that are involved with inflammation, exocytosis, which is basically like a cleaning of our cells that happens, glucose regulation, and lipid regulation. I'm a big fan of a couple of the rock stars in the lifestyle medicine. One is Dean Ornish. You may have heard of Dr. Dean Ornish. He's a bestseller author of a program for reversing heart disease. I enjoy a quote that he says, "An educated patient is empowered, thus more likely to become healthy." And that's really what the purpose of this talk is about, is to help to empower each of us to make the best choices for ourselves, because we really do have a lot of control over how we're going to express our health in our choices. And the other doctor is Dr. Furman. He's quoted as saying, "Excellent nutrition trumps heart attacks and strokes. The same is true of Alzheimer's. It is not predominantly genetic or the inevitable consequences of aging." Again, the takeaway today is we can continue through life to build synaptic connections, cognitive reserve, and choose complex activities through our daily choices. So we have things that we can control in life. Can't control how old we are, can't control our gender. We can't control our genetics. Things like menopause or head trauma, those things happen and we can't control many of that. But look at this long list of things we can control. We can control our LDL cholesterol. Hopefully we're getting that checked regularly. We oftentimes can control pre-diabetes or diabetes, or even reverse a lot of this now. High blood pressure is definitely under our control. Many people probably have blood pressure cuffs in their room that they can check on some regularity. Obesity, we have to know that that's going to not only affect our body, but it's going to affect our brain and our risk factor for developing cognitive decline. What we choose to eat in our diet, whether we're eating lots of high sugary, fatty foods that, very hyper palatable foods that are prepackaged and are really easy to get nowadays. Lack of exercise. We can choose whether we take 20 minutes every day to walk around or move around, or whether we just choose to sit around. Stress management, that can get a little bit tricky, but learning to healthier ways to manage all the worries and things that happen in our life is also an important, because the stress does affect how our brain functions and our cognition. Of course, I just mentioned unhealthy diet, but being socially isolated also is not good for our health, whether it's for our brain health. Our environment, also alcohol. How much alcohol are we consuming? Whether we're smoking, the amount of the quality of our sleep, and even hearing loss, and having things like that addressed, because we are social creatures, and it's really important that we're connecting with others. So I wanted to present this study that looked at about 2,800 participants over 6 years. And it's from the Chicago Health and Aging Project and Rush Memory Aging Project. They asked patients to do 5 different things. First they asked them to follow a MIND diet. Now a MIND diet, it stands for Mediterranean Diet and Dash Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay, so we'll just say MIND. It includes whole foods, plant-based foods, plant fats, low salt, low saturated fats, low animal products, beans, greens, whole grains, cruciferous vegetables, berries, nuts, and seeds. And it excluded or limited red meats, sweets, dairy, cheese, butters, alcohol, and fast and fried food. The second thing they asked people was to just exercise 150 minutes per week, moderate to vigorous exercise. So that's just a little over 20 minutes a day in getting up, getting the heart rate, get a little bit out of breath. Third was minimize the amount of alcohol you're consuming. Fourth was smoking cessation. And the fifth was being cognitive engagement. So when they took these about 2,800 people and compared them to people who didn't follow any of these lifestyle modifications, those that could do about 2 or 3 of them, so of the 5, they picked 2 or 3, they decreased their dementia risk by 37%. Now, when they did 4 to 5 of them, it decreased their risk even further, up to 60%. So we see the more we do, the more result that we get, the more that we're putting into it. A couple other interesting studies that I wanted to share today was a 2015 study that concluded over 4.5 years that it had a reduction of 53% reduced rate in Alzheimer's development, even when they adjusted for other factors like how active and how much exercise they were doing. So I think it really pulls the attention of how important diet is in our life and our health. Another 2023 study, so really recent, they took almost 600 participants over 10 years who did not have dementia, and they put them on this MIND diet. Upon their death, they did autopsies. Their brains were 12 to 18 years younger. Who wants a younger brain? I do. How many of you guys are familiar with the blue zones? There's been a lot being put out. Dan Buettner, he's done a great job putting together books together and looking around, and there's been so much research into why are these locations living a little bit longer, they're healthier, they're longer lived people, happier, they're more engaged. What are these people eating? So when he took all of the guidelines together, he found that 95 to 100% of their diet were plant-based. It didn't mean that they never ate animal products, but it was just a very small amount of what they were eating. Dr. Dan Buettner also says, go wholly whole, which, you know, it's a nice way to say, look for whole foods, look for foods in their whole state. Look for things that you're familiar with in nature. You can still cook and steam, but foods in plastic bags and heavily processed food, lots of salt and oil and sugar, it's not going to give us the results that we want. Beans were found to be among all the blue zones, only a half a cup to a cup a day. That's not a lot, but it impressively really helps our health. Drinking mostly water. Snacking on nuts, 1 to 2 handfuls of nuts per day. He found that they didn't eat a lot of fish. it was about 3 ounces. So think about the size of a deck of cards. Up to 3 times a week or less was the amount of fish that they were typically consuming. They didn't eat eggs very often either. So it was less than 3 eggs per week in total. Added sugars wasn't something that they did regularly either, so it was very intentional. So they really didn't add any additional sweeteners to their food. Reducing dairy. And I think surprisingly for a lot of people, retreating from meat. The Blue Zone Centurions, they ate about 2 ounces or less of meat 5 times per month. I'll have some questions at the end, okay? Okay, that's all right. So we're lucky enough to have a Blue Zone community not too far from here in Loma Linda, California. It's a group of 9,000 people, and on average they're living about 10 years longer than the average American. A few things that are really important that have been studied in that group is they maintain healthy BMIs, so they're keeping their weight under control. 40% of them are vegan or vegetarian diets. They do daily moderate exercise, no smoking or drinking, but they also have social support, so time spent with friends, mindfulness, they have their religion, of course, and they're staying active, so having a sense of purpose, and it staves off depression by focusing on helping others. You can see here in this pie chart where they're getting most of their calories. 33% of their calories are coming from vegetables. Almost that, 27% is coming from fruit. And then you add on beans and legumes and soy, another 12%. I mean, we're getting up into 70-80% of their diet. You can see about less than 1% is coming from eggs, less than 1% from fish, very small amount of 2% added fats. They do some nuts and seeds in there as well, but really smaller amounts of things like meat and poultry. Now, whole grains was about 7%, and most of that was oats. And you also, if you're familiar with the Blue Zones in Loma Linda, to be familiar with Dr. Dean and Aisha Sherzai. They're lucky enough to be co-directors of the Alzheimer's Prevention Program at Loma Linda. So they're working with this community every day. And so they're seeing these patients that, they're 90, they're 100, and they're not experiencing the kinds of declines that other patients that they see are. And so they have put together their guidelines and their program called NEURO, N-E-U-R-O. N stands for nutrition. So they're recommending a whole food, plant-based diet that's low in sugar, salt, and processed foods. The E stands for exercise, and that is for an active lifestyle that incorporates movement every hour. So this is not just like going to the gym. This is, taking breaks, throughout the day to move and be active. They also find that stress management or unwinding is really important. So finding whether it's meditation, yoga, breathing exercises, spending time in nature, being with your friends, community is something that we need to do every day to really maintain our cognitive health. And of course, we have to sleep. Sleep is truly for the brain. We need 7 to 8 hours of regular sleep. Many people don't realize, but that's really when the brain cleans itself, literally cleans itself, reorganizes thoughts, and gets ready for the next day. And we have to remember that sleep hygiene is part of that. So if we're eating too late in the day, or if we have too much stress or things we're worrying about, that's going to affect our cognitive health. And then I think the fun one is O, which is optimizing, and that's our mental and social activities. So that's really where we get to live our passions, and we get to in things that we really enjoy doing in our life and the social interactions. They have found that dietary patterns, so the consistency, is more important than any single superfood, micronutrient, or supplement. I think just kind of sit with that for a minute, because every day we're kind of pushed on this supplement, this vitamin. There's a lot of great things that are out there, but it's really the consistency with this healthier dietary plan that they see the results. We need to start thinking about dinner time, breakfast time, and lunch time, that every time it's a time to support our brain, and that is going to affect our cognitive health. Our brain is under a lot of stress. About a quarter of the calories that our bodies burn is for the brain. It is a high energy machine, 3 pounds, but it takes a lot of energy. And this makes it susceptible to free radicals. So that's why it's really important that we're eating nutrient-dense foods to help protect our brain. They've identified 20 of the top brain-nourishing foods, along with the top 10 foods that they recommend avoiding. So you can see here in this column things like avocados, beans, blueberries, broccoli, coffee, thank goodness, you know, dark chocolate, you know, extra virgin olive oil, you know, lots of good things, flax seeds, herbal teas, herbs, leafy greens, mushrooms, nuts and seeds, things like quinoa, spices, sweet potatoes, tea, turmeric, and whole grains. So lots of tasty things that can help with our cognition. Now, unfortunately, we have the other side, which is our processed foods, our processed meats, red meats, chicken, even if we take the skin off, unfortunately, you know, butter, fried foods, cheese, pastry, sweets, and sugary drinks, things like soda and excessive alcohol. All of these things can be toxic to our brain. So their plan is basically an unprocessed, plant-based or plant-predominant diet. They're adding in polyunsaturated fats, things like seeds and nuts, and they're reducing or eliminating saturated fat, meat, dairy, cheese. For their protein, they're looking at lentils, beans, and soy. And they're also including whole complex carbohydrates and fiber. And where do we get fiber? Plant food. Plant food has lots of fiber. And also omega-3 fatty acids, which contain DHA from walnuts, ground flaxseed, and chia, are going to be important for brain health. In this study that recently came out in 2023, they took nearly 3,000 participants. Their average age was 61. They followed them for 12.6 years. And those that had the highest intake of whole grain had a 34% lower risk of dementia and a 40% lower risk of Alzheimer's. And we saw benefits at just 2 servings per day. Seems very reasonable. Things like examples include whole grain breakfast cereals, whole grain bread, old-fashioned oatmeal, brown rice. Now, popcorn unfortunately didn't result in statistically significant reduction in risk. Can anyone think of maybe why popcorn didn't make it? Yeah, and yeah, unfortunately it was the butter, what we put on, that does affect how it's going to act in our body. Now, if there was a superfood, I think it's going to be the leafy greens. So consuming just 1.5 servings, about 1.5 cups, whether you cook them, steam them, they're associated with 11 years younger in brain age. Again, I want a younger brain. I can eat 1.5 cups of greens every day.
Do you do that?
Oh yes, I definitely get my greens in every day. It's I'll talk a little bit more about that, but it's interesting that your taste buds do change as the more you eat those things, and I think the further you get away from a lot of the sugary, salty, oily, or more processed foods, your body does learn to crave those things a little bit more. I did have a slide just here on meat and processed meat, fish and poultry, because of course a lot of people have questions about how can I have this, how should I? And people think, well, what if I take the skin off the chicken? What if I use the air fryer? Do all those things? Unfortunately, they all contain saturated fats and cholesterol. And so it's all going to increase your risk for both vascular disease and dementia. Now, fish would be a better choice because it does have the omega-3 fatty acids, but unfortunately our oceans are very, very polluted right now. And so just finding, clean, fish is a challenge right now in our world. So, and again, the blue zones, they eat very, very small amounts, the 100-year-olds there. Next, talking about dietary fat and the risk of Alzheimer's, they looked at 2,500 older adults over 6 years, and they looked at those who ate higher amounts of saturated and trans fats, and it correlated with higher risk of Alzheimer's, while those who ate plant-based fats had lower risk, and that came out in 2003. Unfortunately, obesity just doesn't affect our knees and our joints and all that. It still is going to affect our brain. And in 2016, a study published in Neurobiology of Aging found that obese participants had reduced white matter volume in their brains. People think, well, what's white matter? Well, it's actually how our brain communicates. It's how it's sending the signals around. So we really want to protect that white matter in our brain. Unfortunately, additionally, overweight person studied had white matter volume of a lean person who was 10 years older. So it's prematurely aging our brain, carrying excess weight. Now, the Share's Eyes do recommend a couple supplements. They recommend a B12 supplement, and they also recommend an omega-3 supplementation if you feel like you need to do that, DHA. They do think that it does help with mild cognitive impairment, and it benefits patients over 65. Algae, which not everyone knows about algae, but algae is a very adequate and effective, just as probably more effective because it doesn't have the environmental pollution that fish does. I do recommend going with the algae if you want to supplement. So what are some obstacles that we're all faced? We live in a world that doesn't always support some of these changes. We may have lack of access to healthy foods. Maybe it's inconvenient. Change. Temptation is always there. Falling for dietary gimmicks. Unfortunately, the kale and the marketing corporations don't get the commercials on the TV the way that we see everything else. So it makes it a little bit more difficult that way. Marketing and misinformation, social pressure. Our friends, family, and sometimes culture can play into that, and also food addiction. Not every doctor believes in food addiction, but I tell you tell people the coffee machine's broke in the morning, and you get some looks. So I do believe that food addiction is part of undoing some of these habits there for us. Now, solutions, the list is a lot longer. And first, sometimes it can be a bit overwhelming when we think about, well, what am I eating? Sometimes we don't even really recognize what we're eating. But sometimes just take a week and just write down things that you like to eat. Easy snacks that are included in the Share's Eyes program include unsalted nuts, fruit, and chopped veggies. Easy substitutions are things like using plant-based milk instead of cow's milk, bean veggie burgers instead of hamburgers, plant-based marinara sauce, so like tomato sauces are often more plant-based than the meat-based sauces for pasta. Bean burritos minus the cheese, chili without the added meat and cheese, and topping, baked potato with salsa. Trying something new. It doesn't always have to have bacon and butter on it. So trying some new options. I do recommend taking plant-based cooking classes and just learning more about food and how to prepare food. There are meal delivery services, things like Purple Carrot, Grubhub, if you're so inclined. There are places out there, so I do recommend reaching out for support if you're thinking, of what are other options you have. Other solutions for success I recommend are eating before you go places, just so you're not hungry. Talk with people who prepare your food. Just letting people know what you want to eat, and let them know what your concerns are. Find support, and bring something healthy and delicious to share. This doesn't have to be an isolating experience. It can really be a community building event where you can work with your friends and work with your neighbors at making and preparing healthier options. And gatherings with friends and family are about time spent together. I understand we all have our favorite things to eat, but really it is about the time that we're spending together. So the next part of their neuro plan is exercise. This, I think, is, it's the next fun thing, because when we start realizing that our brains can continue to grow and build new connections throughout our entire life, and every time that we get our heart rate up, that we're moving, we're exercising, we're increasing the blood supply to the brain, we're reducing insulin resistance, we're building better brains literally every time we exercise. It reduces depression, anxiety, and attention deficits, and it's also going to reduce prevalence of vascular and neurodegenerative diseases. And again, this is just moving throughout the day. In a 2016 study, a group of older adults with mild cognitive impairment did resistance training just 2 or 3 times a week for 6 months. They compared them to a group who just stretched. Nearly 47%, almost half of them, their brains became younger. They began testing with normal cognitive scores after this, and that lasted for at least 18 months. That's powerful. I don't know of any medication, any vitamin that can do anything like that, but resistance training. So remember that greater leg strength is extremely effective at improving cognitive performance. So think bigger legs, bigger brain, whether we're just standing here a little bit, pump the legs a little bit, bend the knees a little bit, our brain will thank you. Our brain wants to move. And that came out in 2016, as I said. Another fun, exciting study done in 2010 looked at taking daily brisk walks of just 20 minutes, and that it reduced risk of developing Alzheimer's by 40%. Just 20 minutes a day. I think most of us can pencil in 20 minutes a day for our brain. Now, next, it's a little, maybe it gets a little bit trickier, but stress. We start thinking, well, what's stress? Life is stress. There's a lot of things that can stress us out. Good stress, bad stress. I define bad stress as anything that lacks purpose or direction. That just something you're just in this constant state of fight or flight with no solution or remedy. This is going to damage our brain. It impairs how we think. It impairs our ability to learn, motivate, and stay energized throughout the day. But good stress is driven by things that we're passionate about and things that we have purpose for. So being in the moment. I think, you know, it seems like it gets harder and harder every day. There's so many, we get so much stimulation all the time. But just being in the moment and being present as much as we can. But do things that are comfortable for you and try to bring it to all stages of your life. Again, sleep. It seems simple, but sleep is for the brain. Our brain is going to go through 4 to 5 cycles during the sleep. And this is where memory, consolidation, and organization happens. Like I said, literally our brains are cleaning themselves while we sleep. So we need to look at our sleep hygiene, make sure, you know, the sounds are appropriate while we're sleeping. We don't have too much ambient light going on. Temperature, you know, that the room's not too warm or too cold. And a schedule, having a regular sleep schedule, our brain appreciates that. Now, nutrition, again, is part of that because it takes about 4 hours for food to empty our stomach. So, you know, you think, well, if I go to bed at 10 o'clock, I need to finish eating by 6 o'clock just to make sure I have an empty stomach. Also, caffeine has a 8-hour half-life in our bodies. So if you have a cup of coffee at noon, by 8 o'clock, half of the caffeine in that coffee is still circulating around. So it may disrupt some people's sleep. So just something to be aware of. And of course, alcohol does not improve sleep. It may put us to sleep, but it doesn't get us into those deeper sleep cycles. And of course, being worried or stressed, you know, we need to work to address that. And if we have any other medical issues such as sleep apnea, restless leg syndrome, we need to be aware of that and hopefully get that treated. Again, the funnest part, I think, is optimizing. This is our brain is going to continue to grow and adapt throughout our entire life to our environment. You know, our brain becomes more complex, more responsive, more agile, with more experiences, positive stress, and creativity. This is going to translate into better memory, better problem-solving skills, better cognitive capacity, and more cognitive reserve. Look at what you want to do. Find passion, take classes, learn a musical instrument, learn a language, start dancing, arts and crafts, puzzles, mentoring, socialization, physical activity, service to others. The list is really up to you. Here are some helpful things that I think when we start thinking about, well, how am I going to do this? What do I want? And it helps us to put more organization into this. Because we really do need to start planning and setting new goals, being proactive and positive. We have to hold ourselves accountable for change. Maybe that's putting a note up by the calendar or something like that, just to keep us on schedule. But find community. You know, finding a friend who can be supportive in helping you make those changes. And of course, be patient and kind with yourself, always. Some questions that I think can be helpful is, how will you benefit from the change? I hope there's a few things that we've talked about that we think, you know, I wouldn't mind having a younger brain. I can eat a cup and a half of greens a day, whether they're cooked or raw. What are your most important areas for you to work on? So, you know, there's many different things we can start with. And what obstacles might prevent you from change? What might help you, and what are your resources? Who can help you, and how, and when will you start? I want everyone to be empowered, to leave empowered. I want people to feel good and that they do have control over their health and their life, because you really do. The science shows that you do. Shift your perspective from passive decline to proactive cognitive resilience. Unleash your brain's potential with lifestyle medicine. Remember, our goal is to maximize connections, cognitive reserve, and complex activities. The best activities for our brain encompass purpose, challenge, and complexity. And that can be different for every person. Don't retire, rewire, and of course, have fun. That's the point, right? Now, more resources some of you may have read Dr. Dean and Aisha Sherzai's book, The Alzheimer's Solution. It's a wonderful resource, a lot more information than even what I presented today. They've got many talks on YouTube that you can watch. A lot of it's for even for free. You can go to their website, braindocs.com. They are doing the most innovative science in lifestyle medicine right now that I know of. We are lucky enough to have Northwest Veg here in the community. I know they offer things like cooking classes and potlucks, and you know, it's a great way to meet other people who are looking to do more plant-based options too. And of course, we have Keith here, and so I would recommend if you have any questions, ask him. And then sometimes we're like, you know, it's hard to find a provider that is interested in working with me. This website, love.health, is a telehealth to help find a doctor that can work with you. But there are more and more whole food, plant-based, science-based doctors who are coming on board all the time. And lastly, I would open it up to questions, and I thank you for your time.
Oh, excellent. Oh my God. All right, you guys, get ready, because I am wired and rethinking. We'll have fun. You know, I don't see very well. I might need to have help handing out this mic. If you have a question.
Yes.
Okay, good. Someone said yes.
One obstacle that some of us have is they need to eat
Turn
a
it on.
gluten-free diet.
Oh, gluten-free.
Yeah. What workarounds do you recommend?
So the good thing is, you know, gluten-free it makes it a little bit more complicated, we'll say. But there are options, you know, and sometimes you have to find food that is labeled gluten-free. I know sometimes there's cross-contamination. There's people that are like gluten sensitive, and then there's like full-out celiac diseases. It gets complicated, and that's where I think learning to cook more and getting more recipes can be helpful. I mean, steering away from, you know, like oats. You know, oats should be gluten-free, but sometimes they can be cross-contaminated. And I think that's what makes it so complicated in, you know, I know there are gluten-free bakeries out there and things like that, but I think instead of saying what I can't have, focus on what you can have. And so many of the vegetables, you know, think about potatoes and so many of the other vegetables that you can go to for your starches instead of things like wheat that are going to have your gluten and stuff like that. Is that helpful? A little bit. Oh, all right.
Let me know where you are. Hand helps.
Talk a little bit about tofu, please.
Tofu.
Well, tofu can be very controversial.
Every time I bring it up, everyone gags.
I do think it is a health promoting food, and you know, like you guys are familiar with the blue zones. You know, the Okinawans and Japanese, they eat plenty of tofu, and you know, they don't have any higher rates of disease for eating tofu. There are different ways that the soybean is prepared. You know, there's like tempeh, and that's a fermented soybean, and you're still going to get the health benefits from it. But I think things like it's an acquired taste, and it's how you prepare it, and it's maybe the quantity that you're eating it, as far as using it in smaller quantities and not just your main dish and things like that. So making sure it's getting added to other vegetable dishes and things like that.
Well, so if we have the option, which we do, on in our dinner menu, we have something we can choose, which is seared tofu.
Yeah.
I'd say they're usually very thin slices, maybe, what would you say, 2 inches by 3?
Mhm.
And so can you talk about a quantity that's what you want?
I mean, you know, a size of a deck of cards, I think, is typically going to be a serving size for most people. It's a great source of protein. It is health promoting. It is going to be on like the Sherbondy's cognitive health plan. So that would be a good option, as long as it's not a lot of added oils or, you know, a lot of salt or other things like that. Just being mindful of things like that with it.
We are going to have tofu on the 18th of April, and we have several residents who will show you the way that it is prepared. So make sure you keep that in hand. Make sure you put your hand. Oh, good.
I'm interested in how your personal background prepared you for this life change.
Well, like I said, I grew up in rural Oregon, so I really wasn't exposed to very many health promoting patterns at an early age. So like I said, you know, there was a lot of health problems in my family. So I think a lot of it was knowing that, you know, it's when you learn to do better, you know better, and it can be an amazing change for friends and families. And I think you learn a lot about how much food means to people when you start talking to people about, hey, how about instead of this, we add this in? And that's where, when I talk to, you know, I live it, you know, when I go see my family, you know, they're like, what is Jason doing this time, you know? But when you add things to an already existing diet, they're like, this isn't bad. Now, like I said, it takes time in transition. When you're eating a lot of processed, salty, sugary, oily food, you know, I'll say maybe a salad's not gonna maybe taste as good. Maybe the seared tofu is not gonna taste as good in comparison to that for a bit. But as you start making that transition, it's amazing. Your body responds, you feel better. And I think that was the main driver, is the more I did, the healthier I felt. And I was like, you know, I'm really going somewhere with that. So that was it.
Okay. Oh, good. Thanks. Speaking of words,
Hi, I've got, many of us have, females have osteoporosis or osteopenia or whatever, and my doctor keeps saying you've got to eat more protein, like 3 times as much as somebody who's younger. And so I've gone back and forth between trying to figure out if I can get enough protein, plant-based protein, in my diet as easily as I can get, you know, from, you know, a chicken breast, you know.
Yeah.
So I'd just like some kind of quantity, sort of suggestions about how to kind of meet that requirement.
Well, in general, plant-based diets are going to supply enough protein that you're not going to become protein deficient, unless you're just not eating enough. If you're under eating, you're not going to get enough of anything. So you do find that on plant-based diets, you tend to eat more than other people. You know, you have to eat more vegetable. But I would look at more sources, things like the beans, lentils. You know, just eating a half a cup of lentils or beans, you know, 1 or 2 times a day, you're going to be getting good servings of protein. Also, think about leafy greens. They're amazingly high in protein and also going to give you a lot of nutrition. There is a bit of, you know, of course I'm not your doctor, but there is so much push onto protein that I think a lot of people overkill with the protein, that, Yeah, I get, you know, if people want to supplement with a pea protein or, you know, something like that, we can do that. But I've never found anyone that became protein deficient eating a whole food plant-based that was eating enough calories, that wasn't eating just processed foods and things like that. Of course, you know, if you're eating processed junk foods and chips, you know, you're probably not going to getting, so eating food in the whole state, you know, like I said, you know, eating the whole food, the plant, you should be getting enough protein that way.
What can we do to affect change here at HPB?
Well, you know, I think that you guys working together as a community, you know, just expressing the changes that you want, being as clear as you can, maybe even writing a couple things down that you think that maybe you can work for. I know it's in any institution, and when anyone's, you know, preparing food for other people, it gets complicated, and I understand there's guidelines and protocols, but I think trying to be as clear as you can with these are the changes that I would like to see, or trying to provide some kind of option that would help to fulfill these changes.
Can you address the issue of complete protein versus incomplete protein?
So that was popular, you know, a number of years ago. People were worried about, well, you have to, you know, if you eat rice, you got to eat beans, or, you know, things like that. But if you actually look at even just rice, all the amino acids are in rice. As long as you're eating food from all the food, you know, many of the plant foods that are available, you're going to be getting enough protein. You're going to get enough amino acids as long as your diet is varied enough and you're getting enough calories. You don't need to do any excess protein supplementation. So that really has been debunked, that plant protein is incomplete, because no one just eats one plant food. We eat a wide variety of foods.
Okay, back to the popcorn situation. If you eat plain popcorn, what's your take on that?
I think it's a whole grain. I think it's great. I think that in moderation, like with everything, it can be part of a healthy diet.
And then if you wanted some flavor,
Yes.
can you use, because I use an olive oil on my oil for my popcorn, and then I use a nutritional yeast over the top.
Yeah.
So what's your take on that even?
So, like the Scher's eyes have pointed out, they have found that, you know, extra virgin olive oil is cognitive, you know, it's healthy for us. So in moderation again, remember that a tablespoon of any oil, it's got 120 calories, so it's really easy to overdo it. So maybe measuring out oil can be helpful, or slowly decreasing the amount of oil. I know there's people that have like these little spritzers, or people use like the Bragg's amino acids that kind of spritz it over and the nutritional yeast and have different seasonings, things like that. But you know, you can see even the Blue Zones, they didn't have a lot of added oils and things like that. So just trying to keep it as whole as possible. But
Then how about the avocado oil or the coconut oil?
you know, again, anytime you're going to separate it from the avocado, eating the whole avocado is always going to be superior to eating just the avocado oil. And remember, when these oils are taken from the plants, you're losing a lot of the fiber and a lot of the plant chemicals, the polyphenols that are so good, and we're just extracting the oils. So in very, very limited amounts, they're probably okay, but again, we want to eat whole foods and things like that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
grab
You have a
me.
question?
Nico.
Thank you. Who's saying please? Oh,
One final question. To affect change here at HPB, what is the best way we can do it?
Well, I think Aldrin can talk a little bit more about change, and he's got a degree in clinical psychology, and I know one of his talks is gonna be on
Yep.
how change is, but I know just in our conversations, he mentions changing from inside. That when the demand comes from within an organization, you can start to begin to make changes. So when you guys can start listing out,
Yep.
some of the changes that you're hoping for, then we can start working on stuff and things like that.
and in isn't it 2 weeks?
No, it's next week,
Next week?
Yep.
No,
It's the
whenever it
20th,
is.
isn't it?
13th.
It's the 13th.
No.
I thought it was the 20th.
Me?
Yeah, the 20th, better
It's
change
the
your.
20th. Better change your
Clinical
calendar.
psychologist, and he's gonna come and work with us on how to actually do some planning. And these are really good questions. I've been doing this now for about 6 years, working my way down the trail. Right now, the bistro's fabulous. We have two guys in there who have culinary background, both Josh and Eddie. And every day I'm able to go in when they cook breakfast, and they will cook me a low oil, very little oil, scramble without vegan. And they actually they put something different every time. So we're there, you guys. If you're interested, we have several people who want to do some cooking things. When we did the tempeh, the one person, John, actually wants to do some getting together after we do our own tempeh and share. And so we're talking about a lot of different things in community and coming together. So let me know. And if you haven't signed up for the vegan challenge in the mail, do so, because you'll get emails regularly. And then let me know what you want, because you guys, we're hot on this and people are getting very excited. We have a new chef, we have a new sous chef, and I think we're ready to make step 2.
Yeah. I think that in general, people want to be helpful, but we just have to help them to know these are the kinds of changes that are going to meet, your goals. Things like reducing the amount of oil and the salt in the food. And honestly, there's a lot of people that they're not familiar with cooking vegetables. And so it's a lot of sometimes just going back to the basics and talking to people.
Go back to the basics.
So I think it's we gotta go back to the whole foods, yeah.
Right. Anything else? Anyone else? Thank you, everyone, and
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Oh, that was good.